coming back to this point 4 of orientations. Therefore, there is a new substance that must make its way in a slow advance beyond the boxes, columns, and social positions of the past. We need to have a new figure before our eyes to measure our own force and our own vocation. It is important, or rather basic, to recognize that this figure has nothing to do with classes as economic categories and with the antagonisms related to them. This figure can present itself in the garb of rich as well as poor, of worker as well as aristocrat, of businessman as well as explorer, technician, theologian, farmer, and even a politician in the strictest sense. But this new substance will know an internal differentiation, which will be complete when again there will be no doubts about the vocations and functions to follow and command. When repristinated symbol of unshaken authority will reign at the center of new hierarchical structures. This formalization defines a direction that calls itself as much anti-bourgeois as anti-proletarian, a direction completely liberated from democratic contaminations and social whims, because it leads to a world that is clear, virile, articulated, and made of men and men's guides. It has contempt for the bourgeois myth of security and the petty life that is the standardized, conformist, domesticated, and moralized. Contempt for the anodyne fetter that is part and parcel of every collectivist and mechanical system and all the ideologies that attribute to confuse social values the primacy over those heroic and spiritual values with which the true man, the absolute person, ought to be defined for us in every area. Something essential will have been achieved when we revive the love for a style of active impersonality, through what counts is the work and not the individual. Through this, we become capable of not seeing ourselves as something important. It says what is important is the function, the responsibility, the task accepted, and the end pursued. Where this spirit is achieved, many problems will be simplified, including problems of economic and social order, which would otherwise remain insoluble if confronted from outside. Without the counterpart of a change of spiritual factors and without the elimination of ideological infections that from the beginning already hinder every return to the normal, in fact, even the very perception of what normal means. Point 5. It is important, not only for the doctrinal orientation, but also in regard to the world of action, that the men of the new group precisely recognize the chain of causes and effects and the essential continuity of the current that has given life to the various political forms that are jousting today in the chaos of the parties. Liberalism, then democracy, then socialism, then radicalism, and finally communism and Bolshevism only appeared historically as steps taken by the same evil, as stages in which each one prepares the next, the complex unity of a process of decline. The beginning of this process is the point at which Western man shatters the fetters of tradition, rejected every superior symbol of authority and sovereignty, claimed a vain and illusory liberty for himself as an individual, and became an atom instead of a conscious part in the organic and hierarchical unity of a whole. In the end, this atom was bound to find that the mass of the other atoms, the other individuals, had turned against him, and he was dragged into the plight of the kingdom of quantity, of pure number, of masses that are given over completely to materialism, and who have no other God than the sovereign economy. In this process, there is no stopping halfway down the road. Without the French Revolution and liberalism, there would not have been constitutionalism and democracy. Without democracy, there would not have been socialism and demagogic nationalism. Without finally communism. The fact that today we see these different forms frequently together or in opposition should not prevent an eye that sees clearly from recognizing that belong together. They are linked, they condition one another in turn, and they express only the different steps of the same current and the same subversion of every normal and legitimate social ordering. The great illusion of our days is that democracy and liberalism are the antithesis of communism and have the power to stem the tide of the forces of the low, what is called the progressive movement in the jargon of the labor unions. This illusion is like saying that dusk is the antithesis of night, that an illness incipient stage is the antithesis of its acute and endemic stage, or that a diluted poison is the antithesis of the same poison in its pure and concentrated state. The men in the government of this liberated Italy have learned nothing from the recent past. Although its lessons are repeated everywhere monotonously, they continue their pitiful game with political conceptions that are out of date and empty. In the parliamentary Mardi Gras, this dance macabre on a dormant volcano, what is in our possession is the courage of radicalism, the no spoken to political decadence in all its forms, both of the left and of the supposed right. And we must be especially aware of this, that there is no negotiating with subversion, and that concessions made today means condemning ourselves to being completely overwhelmed tomorrow. We therefore insist on intransigence of the idea and a readiness to advance with pure forces when the right moment arrives. Naturally, this also implies ridding ourselves of ideological distortion, which unfortunately is widespread even in some of our young people. It is because of this that they concede some of the excuses for the destructions that have already taken place, deluding themselves with thinking that after all they were necessary and will serve the cause of progress, that we should be fighting for something new, awaiting us in a definitive future, instead of for truths that we already possess. This is because always and everywhere, although these truths appear in different forms, they have been the foundation for every correct type of social and political organization. Young people need to reject these fads and whims. We should learn to laugh at people who call us on the wrong side of history and reactionaries. There's no such thing as history, this mysterious entity with a capital H. Men make and unmake history, provided they are really men. What is called the course of history is more or less the same thing as what is called progressivism in left-wing circles, and it aims only at one thing today, to foment passivity in the face of the current that is getting stronger and carries us continually lower. As to the charge of reactionary, and then ask them the following question: well, you are acting, destroying, and profaning. Do you then want us not to react, but to stand by passively watching, or maybe even shouting, "Good work, keep it up"? We are not reactionaries only because the word is not strong enough, and especially because we start from what is positive, and we represent what is positive, values that are real and original, and we do not need the light of any sun of the future. In the face of our radicalism in particular, the antithesis between Red East and Democratic West appears irrelevant. I got that from About It. It's irrelevant. All right, I don't do that. An eventual armed conflict between these two blocs appears to us even more tragically irrelevant. If we look only at the immediate future, the choice of the lesser evil is certainly a reality, because the military victory of the East would imply the immediate physical destruction of the last representations of the resistance. But from the point of view of the idea that inspires them, Russia and North America can be considered as two tongues of the same pincers, which are tightening inexorably around Europe. In them we see the same foreign and hostile force acting in different but converging forms. The form of standardization, conformism, democratic leveling, frantic overproduction, the more or less arrogant and explicit cult of the expert, brain trust, and the petty materialism of Americanism can only clear the road for the final phase, which is represented in the same direction by the communist ideal of the mass man. The distinctive trait of Americanism is that the attack on quality and personality is not accomplished by any means of the brutal coercion of a Marxist dictatorship and the care of state, but takes place almost spontaneously by means of a civilization that does not recognize ideals higher than wealth, consumption, profit, and unchecked economic growth. An exaggeration and reductio ad absurdum of what Europe herself has chosen. This is what the same motives have created there or in the process of creating. On both sides we see the same primitivism, mechanical reductionism, and brutality. In a certain sense, Americanism is for us more dangerous than communism. Right? That's the bitter pill a lot of guys had to swallow, man. All right, I'm going to say it again. In a certain sense, Americanism is for us more dangerous than communism, because it is essentially a kind of Trojan horse. When the attack against those values of European traditions which yet survive are found in the direct and naked form that belongs to the Bolshevik ideology and Stalinism, it still provokes some reaction, certain lines of resistance, even if weak ones, can be maintained. Things are different when the same evil acts in a subtler manner, and the transformations take place insensibly on the level of custom and general worldview, as is the case with Americanism. By thoughtlessly submitting to the influence of Americanism under the flag of democracy, Europe is already predisposed to the ultimate abdication, and this will come about without the need for a military catastrophe, but more or less the same point could be reached in a progressive fashion after a final social crisis. Again, there is no stopping halfway down the slope. Americanism, willy-nilly, is working for its ostensible enemy, collectivism. Like I said, that was one of the big bitter pills that yours truly, yes, even me, even I had to realize that. It was a bitter pill, okay, that the Americanism, and I'm not gonna stick up, I mean, obviously, there's differences in the Soviet Union before the war, after the war, always the war, right? And they still did a lot of. I mean, it was one of the most brutal genocidal regimes in history. Okay, even your normie historians can say that. Okay, I mean, talk about a truth that was so great. You know, the usual suspects couldn't even hide that. Right, they just throw other things around. But the realization that the Americanism has done far worse damage than any of this stuff, and that the places that once had the iron heel of the communists on them seem to have more healthy instincts in spite of the communism, not because of it. Well, that's a big thing. That's a big pill to swallow. I think it was Thomas Lausunik that really pointed that out like many years ago. So anyway, enough of me acting like I know, like I'm some big dude or something. So next, point number 6 coming to a video soon to you soon.